It was the sight of a beat-up dark blue sedan parked across the street that made Nerea Hale's hands start shaking. Not a fancy car, not even a new one, but one that held a memory so cold and sharp it made her stomach churn. Nerea was the kind of woman who liked things organized. She was a librarian living in a cozy two-bedroom flat just outside of Manchester, and her life was usually as quiet and predictable as the Dewey Decimal System. She was in her early 30s with warm brown eyes and a friendly smile, but tonight the smile was gone. Right now she was leaning against her kitchen counter, staring out the window at that car, feeling a terror she hadn't known since high school. The sedan was identical to the one Liam used to drive. Just the name felt like stale air. He was a piece of trash from her best friend Zara's past, the kind of bad news who didn't just break hearts, he broke people. Nerea had thought he was locked away for good. Years of quiet, peaceful living had made her relax, made her forget the sick feeling of looking over her shoulder. Now that feeling was back, heavy and suffocating. She grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. She needed to reach Zara. Zara, who lived a carefully constructed, quiet life hundreds of miles away in a small town in Canada, finally believing she was safe. Nerea couldn't call, not for a message this urgent. It had to be a text. Something fast, something she could deny later if she had to, though she knew she wouldn't. She opened their chat thread. Her thumbs flew across the screen, urgent and clumsy. "He's back." Nerea typed, her breath catching in her throat. "I saw the car. You must leave. Right now, Zara. Drop everything and run. Please, please run." She hit send. It was the fastest, most desperate message she had ever written. Only when she saw the little delivered confirmation pop up did she realize her error. In her panic, she hadn't selected Zara's contact. She had accidentally typed an extra digit, sending the urgent warning to a number she didn't know, a random sequence floating out into the ether. Nerea stared at the screen, a cold knot forming in her chest. What did I just do? She thought. I just sent a panic text to a complete stranger. But the fear for Zara quickly overshadowed the embarrassment. She quickly scrolled back, found Zara's actual contact, and resent the message word for word. Then she dropped the phone on the sofa, her knees weak, and tried to regulate her breathing. Miles away, tucked into a rental cabin so remote it didn't even have proper cell service, Cashin Moretti sat perfectly still. Cashin wasn't built for stillness. He was a man made of sharp edges and restless energy, a fact only hidden by the thick, permanent shadow under his dark eyes. He was tall, mid-40s, but his face was prematurely etched with the strain of 2 years spent underground. He looked less like a corporate executive and more like a predator waiting in the dark, lean, dangerous, and perpetually alert. Before he'd vanished, Cashin had been a formidable strategist in the family business. A dangerous, sprawling enterprise centered mainly in the Northeast U.S., the kind of business that made and broke empires overnight. But 2 years ago, when his younger sister Sophia disappeared, Cashin had walked away from all of it. He'd traded the luxury suits and the power for silence and a fake name, all in the desperate, fruitless hope of finding her. He was sitting in front of a battered laptop, running yet another dead-end trace on an old burner phone signal when his phone buzzed. It was a cheap, encrypted device he kept purely for emergencies. The incoming text was from an unknown number. He glanced at it, expecting spam or a wrong number alert. But the words on the screen made the blood drain from his face. "He's back. I saw the car. You must leave. Right now, Zara. Drop everything and run. Please, please run." Cashin froze solid. The air left the cabin. He didn't blink. It wasn't the words "he's back" that struck him. It was the phrase "drop everything and run." 2 years ago, in the early hours of the morning before anyone realized she was missing, Sophia had sent Cashin only one message. It wasn't to say goodbye or to explain. It was just a frantic, misspelled jumble of fear. "They know. Drop everything and run. I love you." The wording was too close. The panicked, breathless tone was identical. And the use of that specific command, "drop everything and run," was a terrifying echo he hadn't heard since that dark day. He wasn't Zara. But someone was telling Zara to run from a he who had returned. And whatever this he was, it was connected to a car. The same kind of detail Sophia, always observant, might have included if she'd had more time. This wasn't a wrong number. This was fate slamming a door open right in his exhausted face. It was the first solid, immediate clue he had received in 730 days of grinding silence. A profound, dangerous calm settled over him, the kind of stillness that precedes a hurricane. The weight of his guilt and grief, which had been crushing him, suddenly transformed into pure, focused energy. His fingers, which hadn't typed anything personal in years, moved over the screen. He ignored the name Zara. He ignored the frantic plea. He focused only on the promise he had made to his missing sister, and the new, burning lead in his hand. He typed his reply. Just 2 short, heavy words that meant the end of his quiet, hidden life. I'm coming. He hit send. He closed the laptop, tossing it onto the worn armchair. He didn't look back. The cabin, which had been his prison and his refuge, was already just an empty shell behind him. He moved through the small space with an efficiency born of years in the shadow world, grabbing his concealed weapon, securing the small bag holding his fake IDs and necessary cash. The darkness outside the window was no longer menacing. It was inviting. Cashin stepped out into the cold night air. For 2 years he had been drifting, haunted. Now the vague, terrifying threat aimed at this woman named Zara felt like the compass needle swinging wildly and finally pointing home. It was dangerous, it was reckless, and it was entirely likely to be a meaningless mistake, but Cashin didn't care. He had a purpose again. He had a path, however slim, that might lead him to the truth about Sophia. As he got into the beat-up truck he used for transport, his eyes were burning with a fierce light. After all the sadness and the endless searching, that one simple text sent by mistake felt like a miracle. For the first time in what felt like forever, Cashin Moretti felt a spark of undeniable, consuming hope. He didn't know who Neria was or who Zara was or what he was, but he knew one thing. He was finally moving forward, and he wasn't stopping until he found an answer. Neria hadn't been able to sit still for more than 5 minutes since she'd sent that panicked text. Even after resending it to Zara and deleting the mysterious reply, I'm coming, from the wrong number, the air in her flat felt charged. It was almost midnight, and she was pacing her small living room, jumping at every car that passed outside. The old fear was sticky and real, the kind of fear that whispers that nothing good ever stays safe forever. She had convinced herself the whole thing was a mistake. Liam wasn't back. The car was just a coincidence. She was just tired. But then a sharp, insistent rap came at her front door. It wasn't the tentative tap of a neighbor or the impatient thud of a delivery driver. It was 3 solid, businesslike knocks that sounded like they expected the door to simply open on its own. Neria froze mid-step. She glanced at the peephole, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Standing under the warm glow of her small porch light was a man. He was intimidatingly tall, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to swallow the light. But it wasn't his size that scared her. It was the intensity in his eyes. They were focused, calculating, and utterly exhausted. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in years, yet every muscle in his body seemed coiled and ready to spring. This was not a casual visitor. This man had traveled a long distance, and the look on his face told her he hadn't stopped for a single cup of tea on the way. Before she could even retreat, his voice came through the thick wood of the door, low and gravelly, carrying an accent she couldn't quite place. Maybe East Coast American, but overlaid with a weariness that was universal. Neria Hale? The sound of her name, spoken by this complete stranger in the dead of night, was enough to make her gasp. How did he know her name? She didn't press the buzzer, didn't slide the chain. She just stood there, paralyzed, a simple brass key to her flat clutched so tightly in her hand that the edges bit into her palm. Who is it? She finally managed, her voice thin and reedy. The text, he said, his tone urgent, impatient. The text you sent. I'm here about the text. Open the door. The text. The wrong number. The chilling 2-word reply. I'm coming. It took every ounce of courage she possessed, but she slowly unlocked the door, keeping the safety chain engaged. She cracked it open just enough to see his face clearly. You're the one, she whispered, staring up at him. The wrong number. He pushed slightly against the door, testing the chain. I am Cashin, he said. I need to know exactly who he is and where Zara is now. Even the name sounded dangerous. Neria's initial terror began to shift into deep confusion. He was asking for Zara as if she belonged to him. Cashin, meanwhile, was taking in Neria. He had been expecting someone hardened, someone who lived on the edge, someone who would send an urgent, cryptic warning and be ready for a fight. Instead he saw a woman in oversized pajamas, her brown hair messy, her eyes wide with simple, uncomplicated fear. He was trembling. He looked down at her hand, and the way the key was shaking was more telling than any words. This wasn't a fellow combatant. This was a librarian who was way out of her depth. "You're not Zara," he stated, his voice flattening with disappointment, but also a growing concern. "No, I'm Neria. I'm her best friend," she stammered, feeling foolish and exposed. "I made a mistake, I typed the wrong number. I deleted the reply. I'm so sorry, I don't care about the mistake," Cashin cut in, his voice low and intense. "I care about the warning. Who's back? Who's he? And why does Zara need to run?" His questions were rapid-fire, demanding. Neria felt herself wilting under the force of his presence. "It's Liam," she managed, dropping her gaze. "An ex-boyfriend. He was bad news. I just thought I saw his car tonight and I panicked. It was probably nothing. As she trailed off, trying desperately to minimize the threat, Cashin stopped listening to her words. His head tilted slightly, an almost imperceptible movement that came from years of listening to things that weren't meant to be heard. He didn't look at Neria. His eyes were fixed somewhere behind her, over her shoulder, where the porch light ended and the deep shadow of the side passage began. The back of Neria's neck prickled. Her flat backed onto a small, fenced garden, bordered by a dark, thick hedge. "Did you hear that?" Cashin murmured, his focus absolute. "Hear what?" "I didn't hear anything," Neria whispered, now terrified by his sudden shift in attention. "Exactly," Cashin replied, the one word sending a shiver down her spine. The air had been still too still. He watched the hedge where the shadows were deepest. Just then a tiny branch snapped, not from the wind but from weight. And then Cashin saw it. A shadow that was too large, too deliberate, moving swiftly across the edge of the yard, disappearing behind the shed. Someone was definitely out there. And they hadn't come for a casual midnight stroll. The sheer relief Cashin felt at the realization that the threat was real and immediate was strange, almost exhilarating. His sister's message hadn't been a random echo. The danger Neria felt was validated. His years of specialized training took over instantly. The exhaustion dropped away, replaced by sharp, cold adrenaline. Before Neria could even blink or ask another nervous question, Cashin moved. With a speed that stunned her, he shoved the door closed, snapping the safety chain. Then he grabbed her by the arm and pulled her roughly yet carefully away from the door, spinning her around and pushing her behind his large frame. "Get down," he commanded, his voice a low, hard rumble that brooked no argument. Neria stumbled, hitting the floor just as a heavy, muffled thump sounded against the wall next to the door. Cashin stood between her and the sound, instantly positioned, his hands empty but ready. He looked like an impenetrable wall in the dim hallway light. "It wasn't a mistake," he stated, his voice tight. "The threat is here, Neria. Liam is either back or whoever sent the message to Zara is already in your backyard." Neria, trembling on the floor, looked up at this dangerous, unexpected stranger who had just crossed hundreds of miles and was now shielding her body with his own. She realized, with a rush of chilling clarity, that her panic had been right, and this terrifying man who had come looking for answers had just become her unlikely, fierce protector. The situation was dark, dangerous, and escalating faster than she could comprehend, but for the first time since she saw that car, Neria didn't feel utterly alone. The cavalry had arrived, even if the soldier was covered in scars and looked like he might scare off the good guys too. The drive from Neria's flat to the train station, and then the hurried, tense train ride south, felt like crossing into a different country. Neria's small, reliable car, which Cashin drove with an almost ruthless efficiency, had been left parked at a commuter lot. They were moving quickly and quietly, leaving no easy trail. Neria sat beside him on the train, wrapped in a blanket of silent terror. The whole time, Cashin was on the burner phone he'd pulled out of his bag, his voice a low, intense murmur as he tried, unsuccessfully, to find any recent digital trail for Marcus Vane. He looked like he was carved from stone, his focus total. "We're going to her flat first," Cashin finally said, pulling Neria back to the present. "We have to assume Vane got there first. We need to find out what he took and what he missed." "She wouldn't be there," Neria whispered, shaking her head. "Zara's so cautious. If she felt even a shadow, she'd be gone." "She's either gone or she's in trouble," Cashin corrected, his eyes hard. Either way, her apartment is the last place with answers. He kept the conversation simple, drawing Neria's attention away from her panic and toward the facts. He asked about Zara's habits, her hidden spots, the things she valued most. Neria described Zara, a woman in her early 30s, a graphic designer who worked from home, with bright red hair and a fiercely loyal heart, currently living in a quiet suburban street near London, believing she was finally invisible. The long journey felt like a relentless grind, but finally, they were standing on a tree-lined street in the cool late-night air. Zara's flat was on the ground floor of a small red brick house, a place that looked utterly normal, utterly safe. As they approached, Neria's breath hitched. The front door, which should have been secured by a bolt and a deadbolt, was slightly ajar. Not kicked open, not damaged, just cracked. It looked like someone had been in a hurry or maybe just lazy, and hadn't bothered to shut it completely on the way out. The lights were all off, making the open door look like a hungry black mouth. Cashin immediately pushed Neria behind him. He was a creature of habit, moving with the silent, practiced grace of a hunter. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply put his body between her and the danger, a silent promise of protection. "Stay put," he ordered softly, his hand resting on the small of her back. He slipped inside the opening, moving from light to shadow, his eyes scanning the room. Neria followed, stepping over the threshold into the oppressive silence. The apartment had been violated. It wasn't the scene of an explosion but of a methodical, vicious hunt. The kitchen cabinets were open, pasta spilled on the floor. In the living room, books lay scattered like fallen dominoes. But it was in the small bedroom where Zara spent most of her time working that the violation felt worst. Every drawer was pulled out, tipped onto the floor in heaps of clothes and fabrics. The mattress was half off the frame, its edges sliced open. The small, neat desk was stripped bare with papers and supplies strewn everywhere. Neria stared at the mess, a choked sob catching in her throat. "Oh, Zara," she whispered, her heart aching for her friend's carefully rebuilt sense of security. Cashin didn't waste a moment on the emotion of the scene. He moved slowly, deliberately, his eyes sharp and assessing. He wasn't looking at the clothes or the mess. He was looking at the pattern of the destruction. He kicked an overturned box of cheap plastic jewelry. "Look at this," he pointed out, his voice a low growl. They missed the silver teapot on the kitchen counter. There's cash, maybe 50 quid, still sitting in the mug on her desk. They didn't touch the little jewelry box either. Neria forced herself to look, and the chilling truth of his words sank in. A common burglar would have gone straight for the shine and the easy money. This was no common burglar. They didn't want money, Cashin concluded, his eyes sweeping across the room one more time before they settled on the shredded mattress. They wanted information. They were looking for something small enough to hide. A diary, a memory stick, an old photo, a slip of paper. He walked over to the bookshelf, running his finger along the top of a row of thick leather-bound books that served as her working portfolio. One of the books felt sticky on the spine. He pulled it out and the back cover fell open. The whole area was hollowed out, but it was empty now. Vane had found what he was looking for. Neria was searching through the mess in the bedroom, feeling physically sick when she saw it. Tucked beneath the leg of the bed frame, barely visible, was a scrap of white paper. It had been torn carelessly, one half tossed, the other half stuck. She scooped it up gently. It was clearly the corner of a larger page, maybe a sheet torn from a notepad. The paper was smudged and creased, but the writing on it was clear. It was Zara's handwriting, slightly hurried, repeating a single name over and over again as if she were trying to memorize it, or maybe just practice writing it down. "Cashin," Neria called, her voice strained. "I found something." She held out the paper. Cashin took it, his eyes immediately locking onto the looping, handwritten script. The name was unfamiliar to Neria, but it hit Cashin like a physical blow, rocking him back on his heels. Sullivan. Sullivan. The pen marks were deep, pressed hard into the paper. Zara had clearly been focused on this name before she disappeared. Cashin stared at the two words, his face pale and drawn. He didn't speak the name out loud, but Neria could see the change in him. The weary traveler, the focused strategist, he was gone. In his place was a man filled with a terrifying, absolute rage. "Who is it, Cashin? Tell me," Neria demanded, her hands trembling. He crumpled the piece of paper in his hand, then immediately smoothed it out again as if realizing its immense value. He looked at Neria, and the truth he told her was the coldest, most shocking thing she had heard all night. "Sullivan," he finally ground out, his voice heavy with betrayal. "Andrew Sullivan. He was my lieutenant. My most trusted associate, the man I put in charge when I left. He swore he would help me find Sophia. He was the only one I kept in contact with." Neria felt her legs buckle and she sank onto the ransacked bed. "You mean he's working with Vane?" "Worse," Cashin corrected, his eyes blazing with a fierce, dangerous light. "Vane is an attack dog. Sullivan is the mastermind. He's the one who knew exactly where Zara was and what information Vane needed to get from her. And if he knew Vane was after Zara, then he knows why Vane was looking for her. And if he's involved, then he was the one who betrayed me. He's the one who took Sophia." The realization was staggering. The threat was not just a resurfaced ex-boyfriend. It was a vast, coordinated network involving a man Cashin had trusted with his life. The sight of the small, crumpled paper with the repeating name gave them no physical location, but it gave them something far more valuable: a clear target. Marcus Vane was the muscle, but Andrew Sullivan was the head. Cashin looked around the ransacked apartment one last time, ignoring the mess, focusing only on the fierce, burning certainty that now drove him. He had spent 2 years chasing ghosts and shadows, feeling guilty and lost. Now he had a name written by a friend trying to leave a trail, pointing straight at the heart of his grief and the secret of his sister's disappearance. He gently placed the scrap of paper into his inner jacket pocket, near his heart. He looked at Neria, who was still reeling from the shocking revelation, and he offered her a look that was part apology, part promise. "We're not waiting for help, Neria," he said, his voice firm and filled with a dangerous resolve. "Zara gave us the path. This man Sullivan is the answer. He's the key to everything." The terror of the night was still heavy in the air, but beneath it, Neria felt a fragile new sensation, a surge of powerful determination. She had found a clear enemy, and she had found an uncompromising ally in Cashin. They were two broken people united by a mistake and a shared enemy, and even though the truth was terrifying, it finally gave them a direction. Zara was still missing, but now they knew who to hunt. It was a long shot, a dark road ahead, but for the first time in 2 years for Cashin, and for the first time since she saw that car for Neria, the darkness was edged with the bright, sharp light of hope. Justice was going to be served, and they were the ones serving it. The early morning hours found Cashin and Neria tucked into a booth at an empty roadside diner just outside the London suburbs. The lights were harsh, the coffee was bitter, and the silence between them was thick with unasked questions and unimaginable fear. Cashin hadn't stopped moving since the moment the text arrived, and the exhaustion was finally starting to drag at the corners of his eyes. He spread the crumpled scrap of paper on the table. Sullivan. It was the only thing of value they had recovered from the wreckage of Zara's apartment. "Why?" Cashin asked, not really expecting an answer, but needing to verbalize the impossible contradiction. "Zara had no connection to our world. She was a simple, normal woman trying to escape a lowlife like Vane. So why would she have the name of Andrew Sullivan, a man who sits at the top of the food chain?" Neria stared at the name, shaking her head. "It makes no sense. Andrew Sullivan. He sounds like a banker or a lawyer. Not someone Zara would ever encounter. She's quiet, she keeps to herself. She doesn't know any people like the kind of people you knew." Cashin leaned forward, his elbows resting on the worn formica table. He kept his voice low, gentle but firm, knowing he needed every piece of information Neria had. "Think, Neria. Go back to before she disappeared. Was there anything different in the last few weeks? Did she seem distracted? Did she change her routine? Did she talk about meeting someone new?" Neria took a deep, shaky breath, grasping for memories that were now stained by fear. She described their last video call a few days before she sent the panic text. "She was weird," Neria admitted, finally allowing herself to articulate the nagging worry that had been growing. "A few weeks ago she got this look in her eyes like she was holding something back. I asked her what was wrong and she just said—" Neria paused, twisting her hands together under the table. "She told me that she had been keeping a secret from me. A big one. She said it was something she had to handle alone, and that I would understand eventually. She promised to tell me everything once it was over, but she said if I found out beforehand I'd panic and try to stop her. Cashin's eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Zara, the cautious friend, was working on a secret, dangerous task. A task so connected to her past that it put her in the path of the organization that controlled Marcus Vane and was led by Andrew Sullivan. What kind of secret? Cashin pressed. Was it money? A relationship? A way to finally destroy Vane? I don't know, Neria confessed, tears welling up as guilt washed over her. I should have pushed her harder. I just thought she was dating someone new and was shy about it. Cashin ran a tired hand over his jaw, his gaze locked on the scribbled name. The puzzle pieces, which had been scattered across 2 continents, were suddenly snapping together with terrifying precision. Think about the text you sent, Cashin murmured, his voice now reflective and dangerously quiet. You typed the wrong number. But out of all the billions of numbers in the world, the number you hit belonged to me. The only man in the world who would immediately recognize the urgency of that message, who would recognize the specific threat in the warning, and who had a direct personal stake in the man Zara was running from. He looked up at Neria, his dark eyes filled with a sudden, chilling realization. It's too much. It's too perfect. I spent 2 years in hiding, disconnected. No one outside of Sullivan knew where I was. And yet this text, this panicked call for help, found its way directly to my pocket. He leaned back, the truth hitting him with the force of an oncoming train. The message wasn't a mistake, Neria. The number wasn't wrong. Someone wanted me to find you. Someone knew that only I could put all the pieces together. The ex-boyfriend, the man who betrayed me and my missing sister. This entire journey from your panic to finding Sullivan's name was engineered. The revelation left Neria breathless, paralyzed by a new, more profound fear. They weren't just chasing a lead. They were dancing to someone else's tune. But, if someone set this up, who is it? And why would they help us? Neria stammered. Because they want the same thing we do, Cashin stated, a grim determination settling over his features. They want Sullivan exposed. And they want someone with my resources and my motivation to do the dirty work. He was terrifying, but he was also brilliant. Neria realized that this man wasn't a victim. He was a valuable weapon being pointed at the true enemy. Miles away, in a city shrouded in the last of the pre-dawn darkness, perhaps New York, where the financial structures of Cashin's former life still stood, a small, nondescript office was lit only by the blue glow of several computer monitors. A solitary figure sat watching one of the screens. The figure was cloaked in shadow, wearing a simple, dark hoodie, their face obscured by the monitor's reflection and the low angle of the camera. The security feed was grainy, flickering slightly, but it clearly showed Neria and Cashin walking quickly away from Zara's London flat earlier that night. The figure watched Cashin open the car door for Neria, his posture protective even in exhaustion. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard as the figure finished deleting the last of the digital breadcrumbs that had led Cashin to Neria's accidental text message. A slow, satisfied smile touched the corner of the watcher's mouth. A brief glimpse of a calculating, intelligent expression. The figure reached out and touched the frozen image of the 2 figures in the car. They weren't strangers anymore. They were allies, driven by the purest motivations: love and justice. A low, feminine voice broke the silence, a voice filled with a mixture of relief and grim resolve. The message got through. They finally met, the figure whispered, her voice tinged with the sadness of having to set her loved ones on such a dangerous path. Now, Cashin, you find Sullivan. And you bring my family back to me. The camera feed blinked off, plunging the office into darkness. The orchestrator of the unbelievable coincidence was stepping back, trusting that the love between a brother and sister and the loyalty between 2 best friends would be the engine that finally brought justice to the whole dark mess. Neria and Cashin were pawns, yes, but they were also heroes in the making. They were now fully committed to the path, moving forward together, and that was all the unseen figure needed to feel a powerful, hopeful victory. The dawn was breaking, filtering weak gray light into the dingy diner, but the harsh reality of their situation only seemed clearer. They had been manipulated, their path chosen by an unknown hand. Instead of feeling defeated, however, Neria felt a strange, steadying calm. She was no longer running from a simple threat. She was part of a focused mission. Cashin pushed the cold coffee away, his expression grim but resolute. He knew that if they were going to play the unseen figures game, they had to move past their secrets. You need to know the whole truth, Neria, he began, his voice barely above a whisper, filled with a raw vulnerability she hadn't heard before. You need to know why that text made me drop everything and burn 2 years of solitude to come here. He hesitated for a long moment, organizing the dark pieces of his past into words simple enough for her world. He told her about his sister, Amara. She's 2 years younger than me. She was everything good about our family, the only one who didn't want anything to do with the business. He was a teacher. Brilliant, kind, always saw the best in people, Cashin said, his gaze fixed on some painful spot in the distance. 2 years ago she disappeared. Completely. No ransom note, no body, no goodbye. Just gone. Neria listened in stunned silence, realizing the full, terrible weight Cashin carried. She sent me one last message, he continued, finally meeting Neria's eyes. It was early morning. I missed it by 10 minutes. It was a jumbled mess, but the core of it was clear. They know. Drop everything and run. I love you. Neria gasped softly, the air catching in her throat. The echoes were deafening. Cashin's sister, Amara, had sent a message of desperate warning just like Neria's, and she had vanished. It wasn't just the 2 words drop everything that were similar. It was the whole desperate tone, the feeling of absolute, immediate danger. That text you sent, Cashin said, tapping the table rhythmically. The one you thought was a mistake. The message was so close to Amara's final words that it ripped open every piece of guilt and grief I've tried to bury. Felt like a sign. A chance to find out what happened to her. Neria's shock gave way to a powerful wave of empathy. Suddenly, the terrifying stranger at her door was just a heartbroken brother searching for his sister. His pursuit of justice wasn't just professional. It was personal and profound. Now it was her turn to confess. Neria reached across the table and placed her hand over his, a gesture of shared fate. Cashin, I have something I kept back too, she said, her voice shaking slightly. I didn't realize it mattered until you just told me about Amara and your last name. It's about Zara. My friend. Neria closed her eyes, remembering the conversation with Zara only a few weeks prior. They had been on a video call talking about mundane things, when Zara had abruptly changed the subject. A few weeks ago Zara asked me some really strange questions, Neria confessed. She was asking about a man. She asked if I knew a Cashin Moretti. She wanted to know if I had ever seen him, what he looked like, if he had any family in the UK. I told her no, I didn't know anyone with that name. It meant nothing to me. Until you showed up. Cashin froze, his intense gaze unwavering. She was asking about me? Yes. And she was so secretive about it, Neria insisted. She didn't tell me why. She just said she was doing some personal research for a project, and the name kept coming up. I remember thinking it was so weird because it's such an unusual name. The weight of the coincidence, the wrong number text, the name Andrew Sullivan, the fact that Zara was researching Cashin Moretti right before she disappeared, collapsed onto Cashin like a physical force. He stood up, shoving his chair back, the realization shattering the silence of the diner. Zara wasn't researching me for a project, Cashin stated, pacing a small, tight circle. She was investigating. Why would a quiet woman in Canada, running from a small-time crook, suddenly be looking into the family name of a man she's never met? He stopped, placing his hands flat on the table, staring at the invisible connection that spanned 2 years and thousands of miles. Because Amara didn't vanish randomly, he realized aloud, the pieces clicking into place with a terrifying final sound. Amara was working on something dangerous when she disappeared. Something related to Sullivan and Vane. And somehow she must have contacted Zara. They knew each other, Neria. Or Amara left something for Zara to find. The memory Cashin had buried, the quiet desperation of his sister, was now connected to the current emergency. Amara's unfinished work had fallen into Zara's hands, and that work had put Zara in the crosshairs of Andrew Sullivan. Zara wasn't just a victim running from her ex. She was a detective continuing Amara's desperate search for justice. And that meant the person who orchestrated the wrong number text had likely guided Zara too, knowing she would eventually need Cashin's firepower to finish the job. The danger was exponentially greater, but the hopelessness that had plagued Cashin for 2 years was finally gone. He looked at Neria, his expression a mixture of grief, resolve, and a powerful, burning hope. Your friend isn't just Mira anymore, Neria. And Amara isn't just a ghost, he said, his voice firm. They were connected. They were working together, or Zara picked up the trail Amara left behind. That means this isn't just about justice for Zara or finding my sister. It's about fulfilling their plan. Our path is clear. He looked down at the coffee-stained napkin, where he'd scribbled down a few old contact numbers. The fear was still present, but now it was overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose and a shared, profound loyalty. Two strangers brought together by a seemingly random mistake now had a single heroic mission: to finish the work started by two brave women who refused to let evil win. Hope had never felt so dangerous or so fiercely earned. The adrenaline of the chase and the shocking revelation that they were being guided by an unseen hand had burned away Neria's fear, replacing it with a cold, desperate focus. They had rushed back to Zara's ransacked flat, determined to find what Andrew Sullivan's thugs had missed. Cashin was moving like a machine, checking hollow spaces and loose floorboards, relying on the efficiency of a trained predator. Neria, however, was relying on something entirely different: loyalty. She knew her friend. She knew Zara had secrets, but she also knew how Zara thought. She stood staring at the wreckage of the bedroom. Marcus Vane's men had searched for documents, not treasures. They had found the false back in the bookshelf, but that was too obvious for Zara, too easy. A memory surfaced, clear and sharp, cutting through the exhaustion. It was from years ago, when Zara was a teenager, hiding a terrible report card from her parents. She told me once, Neria murmured, her eyes tracing the line where the plaster met the wood framing of the bookshelf. She said that if you want to hide something important, you don't put it in a safe. You put it somewhere messy where only a real friend would find them. Cashin stopped his methodical search by the window, his head snapping up. What did she mean? The bookshelf, Neria explained, walking toward the large freestanding unit that lined the wall. Everyone hides things behind books or in hollowed-out books like the one Vane found. But not Zara. The men who searched here, they broke things, they pulled things apart. They didn't listen to the house. They didn't feel the wall. She ran her hand along the wall directly behind the heaviest section of the bookshelf, where the unit itself created a perfect blind spot, a difficult spot to reach quickly. Most walls are made of solid plasterboard, but right here near the floor the plaster felt slightly different. A little softer, maybe patched. If she was hiding something from Vane, she would hide it from me too, Neria admitted, the painful truth of Zara's secret life weighing on her. But she'd leave a sign for me specifically. A sign only a friend would know to look for. Cashin didn't need to hear another word. He recognized the logic. Criminals look for what is hidden. Friends look for what is remembered. He pulled a small, heavy multi-tool from his pocket, the kind of simple, practical thing a strategist kept close. He moved the bookshelf just enough to give himself working space. The section Neria pointed to was indeed strange. A small, square patch near the skirting board where the plaster seemed slightly too fresh, too brittle. "Stand back," he warned, his voice low. With a swift, controlled movement, Cashin used the flat end of the tool like a chisel. The plaster was softer than it should have been. With a crunching sound that seemed deafening in the silence of the violated apartment, the square broke away. It didn't crumble. It came out in one piece, revealing a dark, shallow void inside the wall. Neria held her breath, watching as Cashin reached into the dusty hole. His fingers closed around something wrapped tightly in thick, clear plastic sheeting, sealed with electrical tape, protecting it from moisture and dust. It was small, barely the size of a wallet, and it represented the only physical link between the three of them. Cashin carefully peeled back the layers of tape and plastic, his movements slow and deliberate, treating the package like priceless ancient manuscript. Inside, nestled beneath a few folded bits of paper, was a single slightly faded photograph. He held it up to the weak glow of the single light bulb that still worked in the room. Neria pressed closer, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was a picture of two women. Both were smiling, standing outside on a sunny day, maybe a park or an open-air cafe. They looked relaxed, happy, utterly carefree. On the left was Zara, her familiar red hair bright in the sunlight, her eyes crinkling with genuine joy. And standing right beside her, resting her arm lightly on Zara's shoulder, was Cashin's missing sister, Amara. The resemblance to Cashin was undeniable. The same dark eyes, the same fierce, determined set to her mouth, softened by a genuine, infectious smile. On the bottom corner of the photograph, there was a tiny date stamp, nearly invisible, March 5, 2023. Cashin stared at the date. 3 weeks later, Amara had vanished. The world stopped spinning. For 2 years he had carried the ghost of a missing sister, clinging only to a final, desperate text message. Now he had proof. Concrete, undeniable proof that Amara was not only alive and well 3 weeks before she disappeared, but she was smiling next to the very friend Neria was desperately trying to save. Cashin felt his knees weaken. He hadn't cried in years, but the sight of Amara's beautiful, alive face brought a crushing wave of emotion. This wasn't a random coincidence. This wasn't just a political betrayal. This was personal. Amara had a whole secret life, a friendship that ran parallel to her family one, and Zara was the key to unlocking it. Neria, watching the devastation and the fierce love on Cashin's face, felt a different kind of anguish. She reached out, her finger tracing Zara's smiling face. Zara had been her best friend since they were children. They shared everything, triumphs, heartbreaks, fears. Yet, Zara had carried this colossal secret, this friendship with a woman tied to the very heart of the Mafia world Cashin had fled. An entire hidden life that Neria knew nothing about. She was protecting me, Neria whispered, the painful realization dawning. She knew that if Vane ever found her, he might find the connection to Amara. And if he found the connection, he would come for anyone who knew her. She kept me safe by keeping me out of it. The photograph, faded and small, was proof of an intense, secret friendship. It proved Zara's loyalty to Amara and by extension to the search for justice. Cashin gently folded the photo and placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket, next to the scrap of paper with Sullivan's name. The despair he had felt was now replaced by a burning, resolute focus. He had spent 2 years looking everywhere except where his sister truly was. In her secret life alongside her friends. They were close, Neria, Cashin said, his voice husky with emotion. Amara didn't tell me. He told Zara. That means Zara knows something we need, something Amara gave her to hold on to. He placed his hand on Neria's shoulder, a gesture that was now one of shared purpose, not just protection. The photograph was a gift from Amara, a final, clear clue. It was a harrowing, dangerous reality, but it was also the first true light Cashin had seen in years. His missing sister was not just a name. She was a woman with a friend who had left them a trail. Hope had a face now, 2 faces smiling brightly in a forgotten photograph. The photograph of Zara and Amara was the final piece of the terrifying puzzle. It proved that Zara was gone not because of a jilted ex-boyfriend, but because she was actively continuing Amara's fight for justice. They needed to move from discovery to action. And that meant Cashin had to engage with the only world he truly understood, the one he had tried to leave behind. Cashin knew he couldn't jump straight to Andrew Sullivan. That would be suicide. He needed to find the weak link, the person who knew how Zara and Amara were connected, and who was actively working for Sullivan within his own old network. He chose Dorian Vale. Dorian was one of his lieutenants, a man Cashin had mentored for years, and someone he believed was too loyal to ever shift allegiances to Sullivan. But Dorian was also the most likely person Zara, an outsider, would approach for help within the organization. The meeting was set for a nearly empty car park beside a shipping yard in the early morning fog of a Canadian port city. A neutral territory where a conversation could sound like business but hide danger. Cashin insisted Neria wait nearby, inside the car, hidden by the tint of the windows, watching the tense exchange. He knew he needed her eyes. She saw the world simply without the ingrained complexities of his criminal past. Dorian Vale arrived alone, walking with the slightly stiff confidence of a man trying to project control. He was younger than Cashin, sharp-featured, dressed in an expensive, well-cut suit that looked out of place against the rusting cargo containers. Cashin met him by a concrete loading dock, appearing calm, but his body was coiled and ready. Dorian, Cashin greeted him, his voice flat. Cashin, Dorian replied, but his response was too fast, too loud, a nervous pitch underfurring the professional demeanor. I thought you were dead. Where have you been? Things have been chaotic. Cashin didn't answer the question. He went straight to the test. Chaos is Sullivan's trade, Cashin stated, his gaze boring into Dorian's. He's running things poorly, cutting corners, using muscle that leaves too much of a mess. I'm hearing rumblings about a small-time crook, Marcus Vane, creating waves he shouldn't. Do you know anything about that kind of loose end? Dorian's reaction was instantaneous. He stiffened, his eyes flickering toward the dark alleyway behind Cashin. Vane? Why would I know anything about Vane? He's nothing. Low-level enforcement. If he's causing trouble, Sullivan will handle it. It's not our business, Cashin. We should be talking about getting you back in charge. Your sister, Amara. We're still looking, but without you. Dorian trailed off, talking too much, trying to steer the conversation away from the truth. That was the confirmation Cashin needed. Dorian's immediate frantic denial of any connection to a small-time crook meant he was hiding something big. Cashin pulled the photograph out of his pocket and slapped it onto the concrete surface between them. The image of Zara and Amara smiling in the sunlight was stark against the gray, dirty backdrop. Vane's nothing. Cashin challenged, his voice dangerously low. Then tell me why Marcus Vane abducted my sister's best friend, Zara. The woman Vane was chasing was helping Amara. They were connected. And you knew about it. Dorian looked at the photograph and the color drained from his face. His carefully constructed wall of calm shattered. He glanced around desperately, clearly terrified of being overheard. Cashin, please listen to me, Dorian pleaded, dropping his voice to a hoarse whisper. It's not what you think. I didn't help them take her. I swear. I tried to help her. The confession, even partial, confirmed everything. Dorian admitted that a few weeks ago, around the time Zara was asking Neria those strange questions, Zara had indeed approached him. She hadn't used her name, only a burner phone, saying she had information that could destroy Andrew Sullivan and his allies. She was offering a trade. The information in exchange for absolute, unbreakable protection. She was smart. She knew I was loyal to you, not Sullivan, Dorian explained, swallowing hard. I told her I could help her, that I would hide her until you came back. But before we could even set a meeting, her communication stopped. Just went dead. I went to the area she was calling from, but she was gone. I searched Cashin, I swear. I couldn't find her. Dorian's eyes were frantic with genuine fear now, the fear of a small fish caught in a powerful current. I didn't tell you because I couldn't risk it, Dorian confessed, the words tumbling out. She asked for protection from Vane, but the way she talked, the things she hinted at, she was afraid of someone bigger. Someone inside. Someone who monitors everything, Cashin. I knew if I mentioned her I'd be next. I thought I could keep searching quietly until you reappeared. Cashin's initial rage turned into a cold, hard clarity. Dorian was a coward, a traitor by omission, but he wasn't the main enemy. He was just another victim of the real betrayer. Someone intercepted her, Dorian. Someone who knew you were talking to her, Cashin articulated slowly, his voice laced with venom. You used a secure line, didn't you? You didn't tell anyone else about her request. No one, Dorian swore. Only the person I reported my overall weekly activities to. My direct superior. Cashin's heart sank, not in grief, but in a profound, gut-wrenching realization of just how close the poison had spread. Dorian's superior was Christopher Thorne, a man who had stood at Cashin's side since they were teenagers, a man who attended Amara's imaginary funeral, swearing vengeance against the people who took her. The pieces clicked into a final, terrifying picture. Christopher Thorne had intercepted Zara's plea for help. Christopher Thorne was close enough to monitor Dorian. Christopher Thorne was close enough to know that Cashin's wrong number text had found its target. And Christopher Thorne was the only other man who knew every strategic weakness of the Moretti family, and where Amara would hide. Cashin stared at Dorian, not with anger but with grim pity. You were right to be afraid. You're disposable. Just like Zara was. He picked up the photograph, his eyes fixed on Amara's smiling face. The truth was brutal. His sister wasn't taken by an outside enemy, but by someone within his most trusted circle. Christopher Thorne must have been working for Sullivan, or perhaps even using Sullivan as a shield, orchestrating the entire plot. This betrayal was agonizing, but it was also the single greatest clue he could have hoped for. The circle was now impossibly small. The traitor had erased Zara, but in doing so he had confirmed he possessed the key to Amara's disappearance. Cashin turned and walked back toward the car where Neria was waiting. He was filled with a dangerous resolve, the pain of Dorian's small-scale betrayal overshadowed by the grim, fierce hope that the man who had taken his sister was now clearly identified. Justice was within reach, closer than it had ever been, and Cashin was coming for Christopher Thorne. In the cheap, nondescript motel room Cashin had chosen as their temporary base, The silence was heavy with the weight of the previous night's revelations. Cashin was focused solely on one man now, Christopher Thorne, the trusted lieutenant who had turned traitor. Cashin had managed to pull together a basic setup. A few secure laptops, burner phones, and access to the deep network he had built over 2 decades. Neria sat beside him, learning quickly, helping him filter the massive amounts of data. She was handling the logistics, arranging secure payments for the information he needed, functioning as the vital, clear-headed link to the real world. Thorne is too careful, Cashin murmured, staring at a blank surveillance grid. He's running the show, which means he's not doing the dirty work. He's hiding behind Sullivan and whoever else he uses. Their plan was to use old communication backchannels to subtly probe Thorne's known associates, looking for any shift in pattern or sign of communication with Andrew Sullivan. It was slow, frustrating work, but Cashin was patient. Then a small red warning light flashed on one of the secondary monitors. It was a digital alert Cashin had set up hours earlier. A quiet alarm linked to public security feeds across the transit network in the wider London area, designed to flag anyone matching the description of Marcus Vane, the abusive ex-boyfriend. "Alert," Neria said, pointing to the screen, her voice tight. Cashin immediately brought the feed up. The image was grainy, pulled from a CCTV camera in a busy train station concourse. But the face was unmistakable. It was Marcus Vane, the man Neria had seen across the street. The man who had ransacked Zara's flat. The man who had been reported missing and presumed laying low. He was alive. And he was moving with purpose. Cashin looked at the timestamp. Only 6 hours old. Vane wasn't hiding, he was traveling. "He goes by the name Durant Cade sometimes," Neria whispered, her hands shaking slightly as she recognized the menacing face. "Zara said he used it when he wanted to be completely off the books. So he's back to being Cade." Cashin zoomed in on the figure. The man, Durant Cade, was dressed in simple dark clothing, moving through the crowd with a practiced economy of motion. No luggage, eyes constantly scanning. A hunter, not a tourist. "He should have vanished after leaving Zara's flat," Cashin observed grimly. "He was supposed to be a ghost. Thorne is using him as a lure, which means Vane, Durant Cade, is going somewhere important." The sight of Cade's face brought Cashin back to his former life, forcing him to share another layer of the dangerous reality with Neria. Durant Cade wasn't just a thug Vane's ex-boyfriend, Cashin explained, his voice hard. He was muscle for a much bigger operator. A criminal we called the broker. This broker trafficked information, but worse, he specialized in trafficking people. Those who knew too much, those who were threats to powerful organizations. Neria stared at him, her fear twisting into a sickening realization. "Amara," Cashin continued, the weight of the past crashing into the present. Amara was a teacher, but she was also incredibly smart. She was investigating a local council scandal that involved money laundering. Before she disappeared, she was getting close to a financial trail that led right back to the broker's circle. That's how she crossed paths with this darkness. Neria felt her knees weaken as the terrifying scope of the danger unfolded before her. It wasn't just a controlling ex and a greedy traitor. It was a massive, cold-blooded machine. Zara wasn't just running from a jealous ex-boyfriend, Neria realized, the truth hitting her with painful clarity. She was running from the broker's network. She was running from a conspiracy that wanted to erase Amara and anyone Amara had ever known. Neria looked at the photograph of Zara and Amara hidden inside her wall. The secrecy, the sudden move across the country, the refusal to tell Neria the full truth. It all made a terrible, profound sense. Zara's secret life wasn't a betrayal of their friendship. It was the ultimate act of survival and loyalty. She had been trying to dismantle the same network that took Amara, all while protecting Neria from becoming entangled. The pain of the deception was still there, but it was eclipsed by a fierce admiration for her friend's quiet bravery. Zara had been living like an operative, gathering the pieces Amara left behind, trying to find justice against monsters like Cade and the broker. Cashin was already shifting their strategy, his attention moving from the elusive Thorne to the visible physical threat of Cade. "Cade is sloppy enough to be caught on camera, which means he's moving on a lead," Cashin stated, his finger tracing Cade's path on the map. "He's not the one we want, but he is a visible target. If we follow Cade, he will lead us to Thorne, or better yet, to Zara." He looked at Neria, recognizing the shift in her eyes. the simple panic had been replaced by steely resolve. The risk is huge now, Neria. We're going from hunting one traitor to hunting an entire criminal organization, Cashin warned, but he wasn't trying to deter her. Neria took a deep breath, the name Durant Cade burning in her memory. Zara knew this. Amar knew this. They faced this monster alone. Now we know the truth. We follow him, Cashin. We find out what they were looking for. The resurgence of Cade, the enemy who should have stayed dead, was a brutal, terrifying obstacle. But it was also a sign. It was the movement that the unseen hand had been waiting for. It was the chance for Cashin to move from defense to offense, and for Neria to finally honor her friend's secret fight. They were fighting not just for rescue, but for the defiant bravery of two women who refused to let evil triumph. The fight was far from over, but the light of justice was shining brightly on their path. The trail left by Durant Cade led Cashin and Neria on a frantic hours-long pursuit through public transit records and discreet urban security feeds. Cade wasn't trying to hide. He was moving toward a specific dark destination. Eventually, the trail grew cold near an old industrial park outside of Liverpool, a grim landscape of abandoned factories and decaying warehouses. Cashin knew this was the end of the line. Cade was either meeting Thorn or waiting for Zara. They had parked Neria's beat-up hatchback several blocks away, setting up watch in a dilapidated, empty cafe doorway. "This is where they bring people they want to disappear," Cashin murmured, scanning the rows of abandoned buildings with his binoculars. The silence of the area felt heavy and unnatural. "If Cade is here, Zara might be here too," Neria whispered, hope fighting with the gnawing fear in her gut. She was watching Cashin, relying on his cold, lethal assessment of the danger. Just as Cashin was debating the safest point of entry, Neria's phone buzzed. A sharp, startling sound in the silence. It was a text message. Neria snatched the phone up, her eyes wide. The message was from Zara's number. It was just a pinned location. A warehouse only 3 blocks away, a specific isolated address. Neria's face lit up with immediate, blinding hope. "It's her. Cashin, Zara. She's telling us where she is." She started to open the car door, but Cashin's hand shot out, clamping around her wrist with an iron grip. "Stop," he commanded, his voice sharp and immediate. His eyes, usually guarded, were filled with a terrifying certainty. "It's too easy. It's too specific. Zara wouldn't send a pin unless she was in the clear. If she had a phone, she would have called days ago." Neria's hope curdled into panic. "But it's her number. What if she just got access to it? What if she's sending this because she needs us now?" "It's a trap, Neria. A desperate, sloppy trap," Cashin insisted, his voice low and guttural. "Thorn knows we're close. He knows we found the photo, he knows we're looking for Cade. And he knows the only way to lure us out is to use the only thing you care about, Zara's safety." But seeing the desperation in Neria's eyes, the crushing need to believe her friend was reaching out, Cashin knew he couldn't stop her from going. He couldn't stop the relentless pull of loyalty. "Fine," he conceded, his decision made. "We go. But we don't drive. And you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. No talking, no stopping, no hesitation. This isn't a search, Neria. This is a potential ambush." They moved quickly and silently through the abandoned streets, using the shadows and the piles of rubbish for cover. The pinned location led them to a huge, crumbling warehouse marked Storage Unit 43. It was the largest, most isolated building on the block. All the lights were dark and the enormous steel loading bay door was slightly ajar, just enough to tempt a desperate friend inside. Cashin paused by the opening, his senses screaming a warning. The silence here was different from the silence outside. It was a vacuum, too deep, too quiet. "There's no guard, no visible surveillance, no car idling," Cashin muttered. "The classic setup. They want to draw the victims in deep and clean up the evidence." He turned to Neria, his eyes conveying the depth of the danger. "We're being watched. Someone has been tracking us since the motel. They know we found Thorn. They're trying to silence us before we connect the dots." Before Neria could reply, Cashin gripped her arm firmly. "If she's in there, she's in the back. Stay right behind me." He slid through the gap in the door, moving like smoke. Neria followed, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own feet on the concrete floor. The air inside was cold and dusty, thick with the metallic smell of decay. She called out, a choked whisper, "Zara? Are you here?" Just as Cashin pulled her past a towering stack of rotting crates, he heard it. Not a sound but a click. A tiny, almost inaudible mechanical sound that only a man who had spent his life dealing with explosives would recognize. Move. Cashin roared, grabbing Neria and shoving her forward with inhuman strength. He threw his body over hers, dragging her toward a broken wall section, just as the entire world dissolved into a furious, deafening roar. The explosion wasn't a warning shot. It was a massive timed blast designed to erase the entire building. The floor beneath them bucked violently. A wall of fire erupted from the center of the warehouse, instantly vaporizing the crates and sending enormous concrete slabs crashing down around them. Smoke and pulverized dust choked the air. Neria screamed, a sound swallowed instantly by the roaring concussion. She felt Cashin's weight, heavy and protecting, pressing her into the ground, shielding her from the shrapnel and debris raining down. Instinct, sharpened by years of desperate survival, took over. Cashin didn't wait for the flames to settle. He hoisted Neria up, half carrying, half dragging her through the chaos. They scrambled over fallen beams, ducked beneath raging flames and coughed through the blinding smoke. Cashin focused on one thing, the fractured light filtering through a collapsed section of the outer wall. With a final desperate burst of strength, he threw Neria over a mound of rubble, following her with a painful, agonizing stumble. They tumbled out of the inferno and onto the cracked tarmac outside. The air was cool, clean and silent compared to the roaring furnace behind them. Cashin collapsed heavily beside Neria, both of them coughing violently, tasting dust and burnt plaster. Their clothes were shredded, their skins scraped and bleeding, but they were alive. Neria lay there, staring wide-eyed at the warehouse. It was an apocalyptic scene. A monstrous column of black smoke climbing into the sky, the air vibrating with the heat of the uncontrolled fire. The warehouse was gone. She looked at Cashin, his face smeared with soot, his body heaving. He had saved her life. He had walked straight into a death trap and dragged them both out alive. The chilling, awful realization settled over her then. They weren't just chasing secrets anymore. They were dodging assassins. Someone is desperate, she choked out, the words raw in her throat. They didn't care if Zara was in there. They just wanted to kill us both right now. Cashin rolled onto his back, pulling her close to his side, his arms securely around her waist. He was shaking from the adrenaline, but the look in his eyes was fierce and utterly determined. They are desperate, Neria, he agreed, his voice rough. And that means we just hit the core of the truth. They are terrified of what we know, and whoever set this trap, Thorne, Sullivan or Cade, is always one step ahead. He held her tighter, pulling strength from her immediate, resilient presence. They were burned, bruised and targeted for execution, but they had survived. Their survival was their victory. The explosion was the enemy's final attempt to silence the truth, and they had failed. Cashin knew that the bond forged in that fire, the absolute commitment to keep each other alive, was the only thing stronger than the darkness they were facing. They had found the truth, and now they would fight like hell to bring justice for Amara and Zara. The world outside the burning warehouse was chaos. Sirens wailing, car alarms shrieking, and the constant roar of the fire. Cashin, using the absolute disarray as cover, managed to pull them out of the immediate vicinity. Bruised, battered, and smelling of smoke and adrenaline, he flagged down a desperate, unmarked private taxi he'd prearranged through his old network. A quiet route to a safe house he had kept secret for years, nestled deep in the anonymity of the city's outskirts. Inside the quiet, cold safety of the house, the physical wounds began to ache. Neria had a deep scrape down her arm and several nasty bruises, but Cashin's focused care, his steady hands cleaning the wounds, his low, calming voice, kept her from completely dissolving into terror. They sat wrapped in blankets on a worn sofa, the silence now a welcome relief from the terrifying noise of the explosion. Cashin had retrieved the small, sealed plastic packet they found hidden in Zara's wall back in Chapter 7. In the rush to escape the apartment, they had only looked at the photograph. The other item in the packet, a small, durable USB drive, had been forgotten until now. They didn't set that trap for nothing, Cashin said, his voice husky, holding the USB. They know we have the key. And the key is on this drive. He plugged the drive into a secure laptop he'd kept hidden at the safe house. It was protected by layers of heavy encryption, but Cashin's decades of specialized knowledge allowed him to bypass the defenses within minutes. When the drive finally opened, It wasn't a collection of personal memories or financial details. It was a meticulously organized database. The title of the drive was simple and shocking: Project Chimera, the Broker. Cashin looked at Neria, his expression grim. Zara wasn't running from her past, Neria. She was actively fighting it. He navigated through the files, the narration revealing the devastating truth. Zara had been working at one time for a shadow organization, a highly secretive, unofficial group that specialized in infiltrating and dismantling major criminal networks. Her focus was on the Broker, the underground operator who trafficked secrets and people, the same one connected to Durant Cade, Marcus Vane. This wasn't a coincidence, Cashin breathed, his voice thick with realization. Zara was operating undercover. She got close to Vane, possibly as a way to feed the organization information. When she escaped him last year, she didn't just move, she went into deep cover, taking her work with her. Zara hadn't just been a victim of Vane. She had been a fierce operative trying to take down the entire system. The files contained detailed schematics, communication codes, and reports that would dismantle half of Europe's organized crime network. It was a gold mine of evidence. Then Cashin found the subfolder that brought them both to a crashing, emotional halt. It was labeled in Zara's own script, a looping, frantic handwriting. Amara, alive? Cashin stared at the screen, the breath leaving his body. He opened the file, his hands shaking for the first time since he left his hidden life. Inside were dozens of pages, sightings, theories, analysis of Amara's final communication, and cross-references with the Broker's movement patterns. Zara had spent 2 years obsessively researching the fate of the friend she had made in her secret life. Neria leaned forward, reading the timeline Zara had meticulously constructed. One entry, dated just a month ago, stood out: possible sighting of AM at facility linked to Thorn. Not confirmed. Must investigate before alerting Cashin. Cashin was crushed by the magnitude of Zara's devotion and sacrifice. She hadn't only believed Amara was alive. She had found evidence that suggested she was being held, perhaps for ransom or strategic leverage, by Thorn's network. Zara had been risking her life not just for herself, but for her friend and her friend's brother, who was mourning a death that hadn't happened. Neria broke down, tears finally coming in a painful rush. They weren't just tears of fear, but of profound, overwhelming grief and admiration for her friend. She was trying to save everyone, Neria sobbed, burying her face in her hands. She knew the moment she reached out to you or told me we would be in danger. She thought she could finish the job and only then tell us the truth. She realized the heartbreaking truth. Zara had vanished because she was trying to complete the mission Amara had started, believing that by bringing down the Broker and freeing Amara, she would save her best friend, Neria, from ever being touched by the darkness of the criminal world. Cashin reached across and pulled Neria into a fierce, comforting embrace. The pain of the past days, the lies, the confusion, the explosion, was suddenly dwarfed by the stunning heroism of the two women. Amara was likely alive. Zara was a warrior. The file wasn't just proof of the conspiracy. It was a roadmap to justice, handed over by a hero who was willing to die for the truth. They didn't manage to erase her, Neria, Cashin said, his voice rough but infused with steel. She left us the weapon. Amara is alive. And we are going to use this file to destroy Thorn, find the Broker, and bring both of them home. The exhaustion was still there, the trauma of the near-death experience raw, but the purpose was crystal clear. The darkness of the last 2 years, the guilt, the hopelessness, the feeling of a life wasted, was replaced by an absolute burning certainty. Neria looked at Cashin, her eyes red but resolute. Her friend was a hero and now they were going to finish her fight. Hope wasn't a quiet wish anymore. It was an actionable plan, printed on a computer screen, offering the promise of justice, love, and the joyful return of the missing. The chaos of the explosion had burned away, leaving Neria and Cashin in the quiet isolation of the safe house, utterly exhausted but fiercely resolved. They had the hard evidence they needed, Zara's files, confirming Amara was alive and Thorn was the primary traitor. The next move was a tactical strike, but Cashin wanted one last look at the file, searching for a physical location or a final clear instruction from Amara. Neria sat beside him, looking at the screen, where the image of Amara's smiling face from the hidden photograph was still displayed. It was a beautiful, familiar face now, the face of the heroic woman she was risking everything to save. As she stared at the photograph, something shifted deep in Neria's mind. A faint, flickering image that had always been on the edge of her consciousness, usually dismissed as a strange childhood dream. "Wait," Neria whispered, her hand rising to press against her temple. "That necklace." She pointed to the photograph. Amara was wearing a simple silver chain with a very distinctive clover-shaped pendant. "I know that," Neria insisted, her voice tight with disbelief. "I've seen that before. Years ago. I always thought it was just a dream." She closed her eyes, forcing the fleeting image into focus. "I remember a girl. She was crying. We were outside, maybe playing in a garden. She was small and she kept clutching that exact necklace. It wasn't just the shape. I remember thinking the pendant looked like two little hearts linked together." Cashin froze. His gaze snapped from the screen to Neria's face. "The four-leaf clover," he confirmed, his voice barely audible. "My mother gave Amara that necklace when she was 10. It was a good luck charm. Amara wore it every day until she disappeared." "Who was the girl, Neria? Was she Zara?" Neria shook her head vehemently. "No. I would know if it was Zara. This was a girl I didn't see often. I was very small, maybe 8 or 9. And I remember she was crying because her parents were packing up their house, and she was scared to leave." A powerful stillness fell over the safe house. Cashin stared at Neria, his mind racing through 2 decades of memories, pulling up old records and forgotten details. He remembered it. The brief, terrifying summer when the family had demanded his father disappear Cashin and Amara for a few months, hiding them in a nondescript, rented suburban home far from the city heat. It was a safety measure, a punishment, a limbo state. "Neria, listen to me," Cashin said, his voice low with the shock of revelation. "When I was maybe 12 and Amara was 10, my father had to hide us. We lived under a false name in a rental house in the suburbs for 3 months. It was a quiet street. And I remember Amara, feeling lost and alone, befriended the little girl next door. The little girl with the brightly painted swing set." He paused, the implications staggering them both. "That little girl, it was you," Cashin concluded, the simple fact resonating with the force of destiny. "We crossed paths as children. We lived next door to you for a summer, Neria. You knew Amara when you were children." The shock was absolute. Neria remembered the summer now. A hazy, joyful memory of sharing popsicles and secrets with a quiet, beautiful girl who suddenly disappeared one morning. She had forgotten the name, forgotten the face until this moment. The fact that their lives had been interwoven so profoundly, so innocently 20 years ago was almost too much to process. It wasn't just Zara who was connected to Amara. Neria was connected too. "The wrong number text wasn't a mistake, Cashin," Neria whispered, tears welling up not from fear, but from the emotional weight of fate. "It was destiny. We were always supposed to find each other." Cashin reached for her, pulling her close, the truth of their shared, forgotten past strengthening the fragile bond between them. The friendship Neria had with Zara and the deep emotional connection she shared with Amara was not random. It was a powerful chain of loyalty stretching from the past to the present. The discovery had immediate strategic consequences. Cashin realized Amara's final clue wasn't likely hidden in a complex digital file. It would be hidden in the simplest place, the place she knew only her friend, the little girl next door who shared her secrets, would remember. Amara wouldn't put the final clue on a searchable file, Cashin stated, his mind racing. Thorn would have found it. She would have hidden it where only someone tied to her deepest, most personal memory would look. He looked at Neria, his eyes blazing with renewed hope. "Think about that summer, Neria. Did you share a special hiding place? A secret spot where you kept treasures? A place Amara knew only you would remember and recognize?" Neria closed her eyes, forcing her mind back to the scent of freshly cut grass and the sound of children's laughter. The urgency in Cashin's voice helped the hazy memory sharpen. The swing set, the large oak tree, the space behind the garage. Then it hit her. The old, chipped bird bath at the edge of the garden. A game they played called The Secret Keepers. "The bird bath," Neria gasped. "There was a little concrete bird bath by the oak tree. We used to bury little notes and trinkets there, things we swore we would never tell anyone about. Amara buried her lucky stone there the day she left." Cashin smiled, a genuine, fierce expression of hope. That was it. The final, perfect hiding spot. A place only a child would choose and only a long-forgotten friend would remember. "We go back there, Neria," Cashin said, his voice full of protective warmth. We go back to where it all began. If Amara left a final clue for us, it's there. She trusted you once, and now years later that loyalty is going to save her. The long-lost connection felt like a beautiful, defiant twist of fate. It affirmed that their journey wasn't about criminal strategy. It was about the enduring power of friendship and love. They had a destination, a purpose, and a bond that spanned their entire lives. Justice and hope weren't just winning, they were destined. The old hatchback, retrieved discreetly by Cashin's remaining connections, sped through the pre-dawn suburbs toward Neria's childhood home. The journey was charged with a tension that eclipsed even the fear of the explosion. This was no longer just a hunt. It was a pilgrimage back to the source of their unexpected destiny. Neria's old house was still there, looking exactly as it had in her memory. A neat two-story structure with a familiar oak tree dominating the front garden. Cashin parked down the street, and they moved with practiced silence, slipping into the familiar overgrown yard. Neria led him straight to the forgotten corner of the garden. The original swing set was gone, but the majestic oak tree still stood, and beneath its sprawling branches, half buried in the weeds and leaf litter, was the chipped, concrete pedestal of the old bird bath. This is it, Neria whispered, kneeling down, the scent of damp earth and old memories filling her senses. The secret keepers. Cashin was patient, watching as Neria carefully began to clear the debris. The bird bath pedestal was hollow. But the opening, which they used to cover with a small flat stone, was sealed tight with a thick layer of dried mud and what looked like old reinforced sealant. Someone, likely Amara, had made sure this secret stayed buried. Cashin used a small, sharp edge from his multi-tool to scrape away the hardened seal. It took several agonizing minutes of careful work to pry the top open. Inside the dark, cool space, protected from the elements, sat one item, a thick, slightly damp envelope. Neria reached in and pulled it out. It was addressed simply, in familiar, looping handwriting that broke Neria's heart. To Neria. This wasn't an anonymous clue or an encrypted file. It was a final, devastatingly personal letter from her best friend. Zara had been preparing for the end. Neria's breath hitched and she clutched the envelope against her chest, the paper trembling in her hands. She wrote this for me, Neria whispered, tears blurring her vision. She knew she wasn't coming back. Cashin, his face grim, placed a hand on her shoulder. Read it, Neria. She wrote it for both of us. With shaking fingers, Neria broke the brittle seal and unfolded the sheet of paper, the words swimming before her. She began to read, her voice cracking with every sentence. Neria, my sweet friend, if you are reading this, I am so sorry. So sorry for lying to you all these years. I never wanted this life to touch yours, but I know now it was unavoidable. Please don't hate me. I found him. I found Cashin Moretti. He is the man I've been researching, the man I tried to tell you about. He is dangerous, but he is good. You must trust him completely. He is the only person who can finish this. I have the files. I hid the main drive where only Cashin could find it. But I needed you to know the final, devastating truth, the one I couldn't tell you in person for fear of being tracked. Amara is alive, Neria. I have definitive proof. She isn't dead, she's being held by the broker. They have her hidden away, not for ransom, but as eternal leverage against Cashin so they can control his entire network through Christopher Thorne. Amara is the key to everything. Vane/Cade found me hours ago. I ran and hid this last note here where I knew you'd eventually remember. If Cashin is with you, tell him I did this for him and tell him to find the facility code in the Chimera file. That's where they're keeping her. Please forgive me. And tell me you found justice. Neria finished reading, the paper slipping from her numb fingers. The raw honesty of Zara's final communication. Her sorrow, her strategic brilliance, and her final act of fierce, selfless loyalty was devastating. Zara hadn't just been running. She had been a selfless martyr, trying to protect her best friend and save Amara. Cashin snatched the letter up, his eyes scanning the final lines. He already knew the truth, but seeing it confirmed in Zara's handwriting, the admission that she had been betrayed and was certain of her own death, was too much. He had been stoic through the betrayal of Sullivan, the explosion, and the discovery of his sister's hidden life. But this, the final sacrifice of a woman he had never met, done entirely out of loyalty to Neria and Amara, broke him. He crumpled the letter slightly, his broad shoulders shaking for the first time. The years of guilt, the trauma of the chase, the agony of believing his sister was dead. It all poured out in a single silent moment of grief and agonizing understanding. Zara had died trying to deliver the truth to him. She was an innocent caught in his war, and she had chosen to lay down her life to give him the path forward. Neria moved toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist. They stood together by the forgotten bird bath, two people bound by destiny and tragedy, sharing the immense weight of Zara's sacrifice. When Cashin finally pulled back, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his expression was utterly transformed. The grief was there, but it was overlaid with a cold, unstoppable fury. Zara didn't die in vain, Cashin vowed, his voice raw but firm. He held the letter carefully, a sacred testament to her heroism. She gave us everything. Thorn, the broker, the facility code, it's all in the file. Amara is alive. The devastation of Zara's death was real, but the letter solidified their purpose and confirmed the most vital piece of information. Amara was being held alive. Zara's final act of love was the key to hope. Cashin and Neria now had the means, the motivation, and the moral certainty to launch their final, decisive strike. Justice for Zara meant bringing Amara home. The moment the realization of Zara's sacrifice and Amara's survival hit them, Cashin and Neria shifted into their final, most dangerous phase. They didn't mourn Zara, they honored her. Cashin worked for 12 relentless hours, using the encrypted data on Zara's USB drive, specifically the Chimera project files, to pinpoint the operation that Thorn and the broker were running. The files revealed a high-stakes, off-the-books meeting scheduled for that night, a final liquidation of assets involving Durant Cade, Marcus Vane, before Thorn disappeared with Amara. The location was a dilapidated, private airfield hangar outside the city, cold, remote, and perfect for a deadly exchange. Neria had insisted on being there. She wasn't a fighter, but she was the only one who truly understood the price of the information they held. Cashin, seeing the fire in her eyes, the same protective fire Zara must have had, agreed, but under absolute strict conditions. They arrived under the cloak of deep night. Cashin, dressed in dark tactical gear, looked like the ghost he was supposed to be. Neria wore thick, nondescript layers, blending into the shadows. The hangar was lit by harsh, single floodlights. Inside, Durant Cade stood next to a small, nervous man in an expensive coat. The broker, a man with ice water for blood. But the most chilling sight was the third man, Christopher Thorn, looking composed and utterly ruthless. Cashin stepped out of the shadows, Neria just behind his shoulder. "The exchange is off, Thorn," Cashin's voice cut through the cavernous space. "We have the Chimera files. The broker is finished and you are finished." Thorn did not look surprised. He smiled, a cold, empty expression. "I knew you would come, Cashin. But I didn't think you'd be foolish enough to bring the distraction." He nodded toward Neria. Cashin had anticipated a response from the broker. He had not anticipated the depth of the betrayal. Durant Cade stepped forward, placing a hand on Thorn's shoulder with chilling familiarity. "Thorn and I have been partners for years, Cashin. Thorn knew Amara's secrets. I handled the muscle. The broker? He was just the conduit we used to move the family's assets. Everything was a play to draw you out and take over the organization cleanly." The cold realization struck Cashin like a physical blow. Thorn and Cade weren't just working together. They were the central, malignant partnership. Sullivan was just a stepping stone. "Where is Amara?" Cashin demanded, his rage finally breaking through. Thorn laughed, a sound that echoed cruelly in the hangar. "A bargaining chip. But you are too late for a trade." The air fractured instantly. Thorn signaled and Cade reached for a hidden weapon. Cashin moved like lightning, throwing himself forward into the brutal confrontation. The ensuing fight was short, fierce, and visceral. Cashin, driven by 2 years of suppressed rage and grief, was unstoppable, a whirlwind of trained violence directed squarely at Thorn and Cade. Thorn, the strategist, quickly realized the tide was turning. He wasn't a fighter. As Cashin cornered Thorn, Cade grabbed the nearest person, a nervous courier working for the broker, and used him as a shield, pulling a knife to the courier's throat. He backed toward the hangar door, intending to escape into the dark. "Stop, Cashin. Let Thorn go or the hostage dies." Cade screamed, panic coloring his voice. Cashin paused, momentarily paralyzed. He couldn't risk an innocent life, but letting Cade escape meant losing a key to the broker's network. But Cashin wasn't the only one in the fight. Neria, watching the scene unfold, saw her chance. Cade was focused entirely on Cashin and the threat of the knife. He wasn't watching the shadows. Remembering Zara's ultimate act of heroism, Neria found a courage she never knew she possessed. She grabbed a heavy metal wrench that had been discarded on a nearby toolbox. Taking 3 quiet steps, she swung the wrench hard, aiming not for Cade's head but for his kneecap. The sickening thud was loud. Cade screamed, his leg instantly buckling. He dropped the knife and the terrified courier collapsing to the floor. Cashin moved instantly, disarming Cade and leveling the threat. The broker, seeing the betrayal and the collapse of his muscle, melted into the shadows and fled. Thorn, stunned by Neria's decisive action, was quickly subdued. Neria stood panting, the wrench heavy in her hand, staring at the crumpled form of Cade. She had done it. She had stopped the monster who took her friend. Cashin stared at Neria, his breath catching. He had seen countless acts of violence, but Neria's cool, strategic courage, her refusal to panic and her single devastating action, changed his view of her forever. She wasn't just the civilian he was protecting. She was a fierce, indispensable partner. "That was brilliant, Neria," he said, his voice husky with admiration and shock. "That was everything." With Thorn and Cade finally secured, Cashin forced Thorn to reveal the location Amara was being held. A hidden cell beneath an abandoned office building near the docks. They left the neutralized traitors for the authorities, using an anonymous, encrypted tip-off designed to ensure they were caught but not linked to Cashin, and raced to the revealed location, Neria providing the moral, steady focus Cashin needed. They breached the final location, a sterile, underground vault. Hope surged, ready to be rewarded. They found the cell. It was clean, clearly used recently, with a simple cot and a worn blanket. The air was cold and the silence was heavy. But the room was empty. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over them. Cashin stumbled into the room, searching wildly, refusing to accept the brutal truth. Then Neria saw it. Scrawled messily onto the cold concrete wall, almost invisible, was a message. It wasn't written in ink but etched with something sharp and desperate. "You're too late." The final, agonizing realization hit them both. Thorn and Cade had known Cashin was coming. The entire fight at the hangar was a distraction. While they were busy fighting a staged battle, the true enemy, the broker or maybe the mysterious figure who sent the text, had moved Amara. They had won the battle against the immediate traitors, but they had lost the war for Amara. The final, heartbreaking sacrifice made by Zara felt suddenly, brutally empty. Cashin sank to his knees, staring at the empty cell, the betrayal a crushing weight. They were close, agonizingly close, but someone was still one step ahead. Neria dropped beside him, her hand gripping his arm fiercely. They had failed the rescue, but they had not failed the mission. Zara's courage, Amara's survival. The truth was still their weapon. They were alive and the enemy was exposed. They would not stop. The search for justice was over. The hunt for Amara had just become personal, global and absolutely unforgiving. The despair in the cold, empty vault was absolute. Cashin, on his knees before the scrawled message, "You're too late," felt the crushing weight of 2 years of hopelessness return, amplified by Zara's sacrifice and the brutality of the final betrayal. They had risked everything, survived an explosion and faced down 2 ruthless traitors, only to find the core victory snatched away. Neria, exhausted and bruised, felt the shock of the empty room, but the familiar ache of loss was mitigated by the memory of Zara's fierce resilience. She looked at the desperate message on the concrete wall, etched with something sharp, and her tears dried instantly. She reached out and traced the messy handwriting with a trembling finger. "Cashin, look at this," she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. "Look at the way that is crossed. And the loop on the what?" Cashin, still consumed by failure, looked up, his eyes unfocused. "I know that writing," Neria insisted, pulling him closer to the wall. "I've seen it thousands of times. On notes, birthday cards, grocery lists. It's too specific to be a coincidence. It's Zara's handwriting." Cashin stared. It couldn't be. Zara was dead. They had confirmation from Dorian. She had been intercepted by Cade and Thorn's network. She had left a final letter, a farewell testament in the bird bath. "No, Neria. That's impossible." "She wrote that letter," Cashin argued, shaking his head. The letter was a goodbye. But this is a warning, Neria countered, her voice now ringing with absolute conviction. She didn't die, Cashin. She staged her disappearance. She wanted Thorn and Cade to think they had cornered her so they would leave her out of their current plan. She wanted us to find the files, but she didn't want them to know she was still a player. The realization hit Cashin with the force of a physical blow. A sudden, exhilarating shift from devastation to blinding hope. Zara hadn't been a martyr. She was a master strategist, operating at a level even Cashin couldn't fathom. She had used her own supposed death as cover to go fully underground. But if Zara was alive and she had been here to write the message, why would she scrawl, "You're too late"? Cashin's eyes scanned the surrounding area, now searching not for a victim, but for a trail left by a fellow operative. He saw the subtle, almost invisible scuff marks on the floor leading not toward the exit, but toward a barely noticeable ventilation grate near the ceiling. Zara wasn't warning us that Amara was gone, Cashin realized, the truth hitting him with crystalline clarity. She was warning us that the original plan, the plan to rescue Amara from this facility, was obsolete. He looked back at the file on the secure laptop they'd brought with them, zooming in on Zara's research. The truth hidden even from the powerful Chimera file finally emerged. Zara didn't just find proof that Amara was alive and imprisoned. She found proof that Amara was gone weeks ago. Zara hadn't been tracking Amara's location to this facility. She had been tracking Amara's escape from this facility. Amara, the gentle sister, hadn't been a passive victim. Using her years of observation of the criminal world and her own quiet brilliance, she had successfully executed her own escape, cutting ties with Thorn and Cade weeks earlier. Zara had likely discovered Amara's successful flight and gone underground immediately, using her own death as the final distraction, shielding Amara and continuing the hunt for the core players, the broker and whoever was higher than Thorn. The emptiness of the room was not a sign of failure but a sign of success. Amara was free. The immense, suffocating grief that had momentarily paralyzed Cashin evaporated, replaced by a fierce, joyful resolve. His sister was alive, fighting and free. And Zara was alive, protecting her. Cashin stood up, pulling Neria into a powerful embrace, tears of relief and sheer adrenaline-fueled elation streaming down his face. She's free, Neria. They're both free. They've been playing this game longer than we have. Just as the relief settled, Neria's phone, the only phone they had that still carried the original compromised number, pinged again. It was a text, the message bypassing all security, appearing directly on the screen. Neria picked it up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. The message was short, devoid of emotion and chillingly clear. "I have her. Don't trust anyone." The handwriting was not Zara's. It was clean, digital and professional. Cashin and Neria stared at the message. The realization was stark and frightening. Amara and Zara were free and working together, but they were still in deep trouble. They were being helped, or tracked, by a third party, someone powerful enough to monitor their movements and send an untraceable message. Someone who was clearly suspicious of Cashin's own past. Cashin looked at Neria, his partner forged in fire and bound by destiny. He saw the exhaustion but also the fierce, unyielding determination in her eyes. The initial quest for justice was over. They had exposed the traitors, but the true prize, Amara and Zara, was still out there fighting for their lives against an unseen enemy. "They're alive," Cashin said, his voice ringing with renewed purpose. "And they're calling the shots now. We have to find them, Neria. We have to prove we can be trusted." Neria nodded, meeting his gaze with absolute resolve. She had found a purpose, a family, and a destiny she never knew she possessed. They had exposed the conspiracy, but the final global hunt for the two courageous women who ran ahead of them had just begun. Their story wasn't ending. It was expanding onto a grand, international stage. We have come to the end of the story. Thank you for watching to the end. Share your opinion about this story in the comments below. I like getting feedback from my audience. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories.